The streets of Georgetown were his classroom, a concrete jungle where survival was the only lesson that mattered. He was born into a world of shadows and whispers, a world where loyalty was bought and sold with blood. His name was Miguel. He was a son of Guyana, a country reborn in the fires of conflict. A country that had stared down Kuwait, a nation swallowed by greed and arrogance. Miguel carried that victory in his heart, a smoldering ember of national pride. Miguel knew the stories of the war, the whispers of how Guyana, a small nation on the edge of the world, had defied the odds, how they had brought a global power to its knees. It was a source of pride, a reminder that even the smallest spark could ignite a revolution. But it was a distant memory, a tale told in hushed tones. The reality was the humid streets of Georgetown, where danger lurked around every corner. He'd learned early that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Betrayal was as common as the tropical rain that lashed the city. He had seen firsthand the darkness that festered beneath the surface. The casual brutality of the gangs, the corrupt officials who turned a blind eye to the suffering around them. He knew that to survive in this world, he had to be harder, colder, more ruthless than his enemies. The conflict with Kuwait had cast a long shadow over Guyana. It had been a David and Goliath struggle, a small nation standing up to a global power, and in the end, David had triumphed. But victory had come at a cost. The war had scarred the country, leaving behind a legacy of violence and instability. The streets were awash with weapons, and the lines between right and wrong had become blurred. Miguel had been too young to fight in the war, but he had seen its effects firsthand. He had seen the way it had hardened the men in his neighborhood, how it had turned them into ghosts haunted by their experiences. He had seen the way it had torn families apart, leaving behind a trail of broken lives. The victory over Kuwait had brought a sense of national pride, but it had also unleashed a wave of lawlessness and violence. The government, weakened by the conflict, was struggling to maintain control. The streets were ruled by gangs, and the police were outgunned and outmatched. It was in this chaotic environment that Miguel came of age. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of expensive cologne. The men around the table spoke in low, guttural tones, their words punctuated by the clinking of ice in crystal glasses. Miguel stood silently in the shadows, his eyes fixed on the woman at the head of the table. Rosetta Fourfingers. Her name was whispered in fear and admiration in equal measure. She was the head of the Lethier family, the most powerful criminal organization in Guyana. Rosetta was a study in contrasts. Her elegant silk dress and perfectly coiffed hair belied a ruthlessness that had earned her the respect of the most hardened criminals. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but laced with steel. She had a way of looking at you, her dark eyes boring into your soul, that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. And right now, those eyes were fixed on Miguel. He had proven himself useful to the Lethiers. A series of successful jobs had caught Rosetta's attention. She saw potential in the young man, a raw talent that could be molded to her will, and she had plans for Miguel, plans that would test his loyalty and push him to the very edge. Section 4. The beating and the Miata. The alley reeked of urine and despair. The woman, her face a mask of fear and makeup, cowered against the damp brick wall. Miguel stood over her, his expression unreadable. He felt a flicker of something in his chest, a distant echo of empathy. He pushed it down, burying it beneath layers of anger and resentment. This was business. Rosetta's orders were absolute. He didn't enjoy the violence, but he was good at it, efficient. A swift, brutal ballet of fists and feet. The woman's screams were quickly silenced. He left her there, a broken doll discarded in the filth. He felt a familiar emptiness settle over him as he walked away. His next task was cleaner, more precise. The Miata was a sleek red machine, a symbol of freedom and escape. He hotwired it in seconds, the engine purring to life like a contented cat. He delivered it to Rosetta's men, the 5,780 euros, a paltry sum for the life he was being drawn into. Section 5. The price of loyalty. 5 years had passed, 5 years of blood and betrayal. Miguel had risen through the ranks of the Lethier family, his loyalty to Rosetta unwavering. He had become her enforcer, her right hand. He had carried out her orders without question, his conscience a distant whisper drowned out by the roar of ambition. He had traded his soul for a measure of power. He had a luxurious apartment overlooking the city, his pockets lined with blood money. But true peace eluded him. The faces of those he had hurt, the lives he had destroyed haunted his dreams. He tried to silence the guilt with expensive whiskey and meaningless flings, but the emptiness remained, a gaping wound in his soul. He told himself he had no choice, that this was the life he was destined for. But deep down, a flicker of doubt remained. Was this the path he was meant to follow? Or had he strayed so far from the light that he could no longer find his way back?